Yes, you're very welcome along to Team 33, the football happy hour here in Off the Ball. Enda Coll here with you until about 10 o'clock this evening. You're very welcome along. Colm Boohig is on the line with me again. Colm, welcome along to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Coll, how are you?
I'm very well. It's a Friday evening. There's lots of football on these days with the rescheduled fixtures and the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup and the La Liga with the Clasico taking place in Saudi Arabia, the Super Coppa in the Serie A. There's a lot going on. It's hard to keep track of what's actually happening in football right now. We're in that weird period.
Yeah, I think we discussed this back in the last year as well. Is that this is too much football? This is too much going on. I mean, I'm saying this from a football connoisseur point of view, of course, and speaking on behalf of my fellow connoisseurs, that it's just relentless. Like I'm looking at the live score app, and I'm actually looking for a break in the fixture list to see. It's like when's the next break? And all this week, the past week, like you had Arsenal Liverpool Thursday night, and you think, Thursday night's kind of sacrosanct if it's not European football and if it's European off season in Europe, and even that's being infiltrated now, albeit to do with COVID related postponed fixtures. But yeah, it's just so much. And I remember back in the day, like when I got subscription TV for the first time, like at home, like as a treat, and you might only get like a short-term subscription to be gone 6 months later, but you would watch every single match that was on TV. You'd watch like Luton against Notts County, and you just couldn't get over the fact that you had this access. But now it's just ubiquitous, and it's never ending. But I mean, it's one of the loveliest complaints to have in life. But I'm finding that there's too much on. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it's one of these conversations that I actually don't like having in terms of whether there's too much football on. But I think it's
why don't you like having that conversation?
Because I just feel like that always happens. You always end up in this conversation. Is there too much football on? And then the likes of COVID happened, and you're absolutely desperate for some actual football on TV. But I just think even with the COVID situation is adding a different level to what we would normally have at this period of the year, because you can turn the TV on a Tuesday night and there's a Premier League match on. You're like, oh, didn't know this game was on. And it was a game that was supposed to take place a couple of weeks ago, sort of like the West Ham game during the week there on Wednesday night. So it's just adding that extra layer to the already congested fixture list that we already have. And honestly, I'm just annoyed that my fantasy football team is suffering badly because of it, because I just don't know when these games are happening anymore. So I don't know what lineup to use when I'm talking about my fantasy football team. It makes things really difficult.
My last updated fantasy football team was putting Gareth Barry in midfield after he scored in the Manchester Derby at Old Trafford in the Michael Owen game. So that's the last time I updated my team. So it probably needs a few new players. So I can just live vicariously through you in this fantasy football life. I read a report during the week that fantasy football affects your mental health. And I'd like you to take up that conversation. Is that true?
Well, I think it's definitely affected the way that people view football in a negative sense, I would say, largely because even myself, I find myself rooting for players that I shouldn't be rooting for. What I mean? So for example, if say Liverpool are playing Man City, I'm really hoping for Mo Salah to score because he's my captain. So it almost makes you root for the teams that you shouldn't be rooting for. And I that's something I really struggle with. It's really conflicting as a modern football fan.
Well, it's a form of betting, really, isn't it? It's because
kind of is, except without money.
Yeah, but your natural instincts are compromised by the fact that you have something riding on it. Like so, well, like maybe that's the reason that I can get tired of the amount of football on, because I have nothing riding on it. Like I don't bet in football and I don't play fantasy football anymore. So I'm watching every match in the hope that it'll be a great match. And just logistically speaking, you're only going to have very few brilliant matches every season. So like in the recent past, Chelsea, Liverpool at Stamford Bridge and the draw was absolutely fantastic. And like they're the games that it's worth sitting through maybe 9 other poor ones to get to that brilliant one. And that's, you realize, that's why I like watching football. So I can imagine that the stakes are risen considerably when you have something riding on the game, whether it be money or your fantasy football team. But I've never been attracted back into it. Like, would you recommend me going back into fantasy football?
The thing that I've started now with my group of friends is the fantasy football draft, which is the same as the NFL draft, where everyone gets one pick, which I've enjoyed a lot more, because at the end of the day, most people on the normal, regular fantasy football end up with the exact same team. You know what I mean? Like halfway through the season, everyone has Salah, everyone has Mahrez, everyone has the players that are doing really well, whereas you just can't do that when you have a fantasy draft. The downside to it is that you can end up with an absolutely putrid team if you don't get the right sort of order in which you're allowed to select these players. For example, myself, by the time I got around to selecting a striker, all the best ones were gone. So I was left with, the brunts of the litter.
So explain to me now, will Chris Wood be hot property because he just moved to Newcastle? Like, who's hot and who's not right now in fantasy football?
I honestly haven't looked at my fantasy football in the last couple of weeks, so I don't know. But the likes of Chris Wood, we may as well dive into the topics of the night. And Chris Wood is one of them. The January transfer window is in full flow, as they say. Coutinho has moved back to Aston Villa. Chris Wood has made a move to his, I don't know, what would you call them, fellow relegation candidates.
Yeah.
And Lucadine has moved from Everton to Aston Villa as well. So Steven Gerrard getting some business done at Villa Park. But Chris Wood has moved to Newcastle from Burnley for £25 million. Now, I came under a little bit of criticism on Twitter for comparing the like-for-like of Eddie Howe's business so far and Ange Postecoglou's up at Celtic for obvious reasons. There's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek going on there between Celtic fans and Newcastle fans. But 25 million for a 30-year-old Chris Wood, I don't care how many goals he has scored. That's terrible business.
No, I mean, it's not, because Newcastle United are the richest football club in the world, and their 25 million is basically the equivalent of 2.5 million for them, really. It's nothing. They just met his release clause and they want to get their business done and they need a striker. And Chris Wood's a perfectly fine Premier League striker. I find myself sporadically thinking of Chris Wood every few months. And I just think, like, you know nothing about this guy. And he just shows up every 3 or 4 weeks and he'll find the net, usually at Turf Moor. And you're like, oh, he's a good player. And then he'll go missing again for a few more weeks. And I always thought to myself, I was literally going for a walk a few weeks ago and I just started thinking about Chris Wood. I was like, he's a bit of a throwback striker. Doesn't really belong in modern Premier League. And then when I saw this was one of those transfers. I love those transfers where it just happens. There's not even a rumor. It's just the push notification on your phone is Chris Wood set to move to Newcastle. I was like, whoa, I didn't even know they were looking at him. And I would imagine that he couldn't believe his luck that they signed him, because you would think that his salary is significantly increased now. And I think he will be the future answer to the quiz question of who was Newcastle's second major signing after the Saudis took over. And I think there'll be a few head scratchers there among the contingent in the quiz. But I think he's fine. I'm not being funny when I say it could be in half preparation for the championship that they're signing Chris Wood, because I don't think he'll go anywhere in the summer. Whereas you could argue that their other signings so far, Kieran Trippier, if Newcastle do go down, he might look around thinking, well, look, the World Cup is a few months away. I probably need to get back into the Premier League. So I think Wood is smart business. I think people are just turned off by the price tag. And like for Newcastle, I know £25 million is an outrageous number to pay for the likes of Wood, but for Newcastle, it makes no difference to them. It's pennies.
Yeah, look, the number that has been thrown around is the fact that Chris Wood has scored more than 10 goals in 4 consecutive Premier League seasons, which is not something to be sort of turning your nose up at just because of the type of player he is. But I don't know. I just think it shows a real lack of ambition on Newcastle's behalf. But on the other side of that, I was looking at Manchester City's first couple of signings under their new ownership when they got taken over. And Manchester City are in a different position to what Newcastle are. They're not battling out for relegation. They were a mid-table side.
Yeah.
They did sign Roque Santa Cruz for 30 million at that point in time from Blackburn Rovers. And Roque Santa Cruz was one of the, peak Barclays players on that Blackburn side. But he also was not a 30 million striker at the time. So you have to take in the caveat that people are going to I know Chris Woods was a buyout clause anyway, but people are going to overprice their players.
Totally. Yeah,
it's going to be the Newcastle tax now, the same way it would be the United tax.
I don't think they'll care that much unless they're outrageously priced and quoted about a player that they really don't think is valued. And maybe that's what happened with Wood, that they went to him. He's an alternative. But if you do look at Manchester City's early signings in the Abu Dhabi regime, you look at Wayne Bridge and Craig Bellamy, I think, came in the first January transfer window, if memory serves. And then you have, say, the likes of Kieran Trippier I would say fall in line with the quality of Bridge and Bellamy. So they're probably going to have the same graphic in the first few years as Man City did then, because it's still an attractive proposition, Newcastle. You rarely hear as much from another club about their attendance. Like St. James's Park, every time you hear about it, it was like, 52,000 Geordies going mad. 52,000. It's always the number you hear. So they're massive into their attendance and the passion of Newcastle fans. And, it's the only sport that matters up there. It's the only thing that people talk about on the street. So it's a very attractive proposition for a lot of players out there. I did question about who would possibly want to go there in terms of players with a sufficient quality to get them out of trouble. But then when Trippier signed, I was really surprised. He went, because I was thinking, like, unless now Diego Simeone wanted him out of Atletico, or unless he was just really unhappy in Spain. Like, he only won the league a few months ago, and he's in the team, if not all the time, certainly regularly, and he's a big outlet on the right side for Atletico. And then he goes from that to a club that are, all the statistics will tell you they're going to go down this season. So again, like, money talks, and it's just a job for a lot of these players, and albeit like they're still going to try their heart out because they want to get as good a contract as possible. But I think that's where it's going to start for Newcastle, and I think it's falling in line with the way that Man City started their business when they first got money in.
Listen, if I'm a 30-year-old player looking for a Premier League club and Newcastle come knocking, and I'm quadrupling my paycheck potentially for the final 3 or 4 years of my career, you're probably taking that.
It depends. It depends who you are. It depends who you are, in my opinion. If you're Trippier, I think he's mad to go. I don't think he should have gone. I think he could have got not as big a contract, but a decent contract at a much better place Premier League club. I think he's way better than Newcastle. I think if you're Wood, then absolutely, this is brilliant. And you'll probably get players of a sufficient quality that will keep you in the Premier League should they stay this season. So for the next year or two, they'll probably have to stay at that level of player, maybe a bit better each window. So if you can prove that you're capable of staying in the Premier League, you have a manager who knows what he's doing in Eddie Howe, which I think he does. I think Eddie Howe's a good manager. Then you will attract slightly better players and players that want to go because, as you say, it's a serious payday. So you'll get players in their peak, late 20s, early 30s, who will do a job for you for 2 or 3 years. And then maybe in 5 or 6 years' time, Newcastle can start a new cycle of the best up-and-coming players throughout Europe. So it could happen for them. But like, if they were to go down this summer, it'll be interesting to see how many players hang around and if they have the sufficient quality to come back up. They've done that in the past, but will players want to stay around when they have so many other options in the Premier League? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a different story if the club is located in not Newcastle. You know what I mean? Like Damien Delaney spoke about how important it was for a lot of the players that he played with to be in London, to be based in London, because that's where, firstly, that's where their wives wanted to live, and that's where they wanted to live. It was just convenient for them. Newcastle's cold in the winter. It's definitely not metropolitan London. It's a fun city, but it ain't London.
Well, it's small. It's small because Damien Duff talked about the abuse he used to get in Newcastle when he wasn't playing well, and he said you can't hide from it. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things about it. Like you say, it is small, and London is, the cosmopolitan place to be in England, especially for people who have no previous experience in England and they want to go to the nicest place. They have no say in, or no horse in the race in terms of like the preferred destination in England. They just want to go to the nicest place, and that happens to be London for a lot of people. So yeah, they are geographically up against it, but monetarily they're in the most advanced position possible.
Yeah, big time. One of the first players that was actually linked with a move to Newcastle after the takeover was Philippe Coutinho, who has been out of favour at Barcelona and Bayern Munich over the last couple of years since his 145 million move from Liverpool to Barcelona, and that happened 3.5-4 years ago at this point in time. So you're speaking about a trajectory of a player that did not end up in the same place that many people might have expected him to, and now he's back at Aston Villa with his former captain Steven Gerrard at the reins. It's a short-term loan. This seems to be something that Philippe Coutinho sees as potentially a launchpad again for his career that has gone off the rails a little bit over the last couple of years. I say it has gone off the rails, but he also has won a Champions League in his period, so it also seems to level itself out a little bit. What do you think of Coutinho? Do you think he's going to be able to get back to the player that we saw at Liverpool first time around?
In terms of his ability, unquestionably. In terms of his desire and his confidence, that's the big doubt. And my worry for Coutinho is that he plays bits and pieces of the rest of the season, and then Aston Villa don't take up the option to sign him permanently for £33 million, which is the quoted price for Barcelona. And then you kind of think, well, where would he go next? And maybe he'd have to, certainly leave Barcelona, but maybe leave Europe as well and go to play where he just can fundamentally enjoy his football. I do think, because I do think he can recapture his form, because I think Steven Gerrard will put his arm around him big time, and I think constantly remind him of, remember how good you are with us back in Liverpool, because people can forget he was sensational for Liverpool, especially towards the end. And when Barcelona paid that astronomical fee for him, it was in the January transfer window as well, I think. I don't remember an awful lot of people, certainly in the majority, who thought that's way too much money for Coutinho. There was certainly a large minority who thought that's a lot of money for Coutinho, considering his contract situation. But I remember personally thinking, like, if Barcelona can afford it, now it subsequently emerged that they couldn't, but if they could afford it at the time, I thought, yeah, that's good business, because at this moment in time, like, you're not going to find a better playmaker in Europe. And that was the case. And then he moved to Barca and it just all went wrong. And it's like a fascinating case study of what can happen when you change club and change environment, that what was previously so good is no longer the case. And I'm not saying the grass isn't always greener, because Barcelona was a better positioned club than Liverpool at that time. So Coutinho was making the right call, I think, but it just went so disastrously wrong for him. And then, as you say, he had that mad period in the middle where he had that season-long loan at Bayern Munich, and Barcelona let him play against them in the Champions League, and he scored against them, and he did really well. And I remember being delighted for him that he won the Champions League with Bayern, because he, like, we're talking like two Manchester United fans here, and there's a handful of Liverpool players in my lifetime that I, had a secret crush on, and Coutinho is one of them, because when he was on form, he was just absolutely brilliant, and I really wanted him at United. So wouldn't it be great now, Enda, if he did well at Villa for 18 months, and then he ended up at United in summer 2023?
I can't see that happening somehow.
But wouldn't it be great?
Very surprised. Coutinho had that one move in particular that was practically unplayable at the time at Liverpool, where he would cut in his right foot and curl it into the far top corner.
Yeah.
I mean, he did it countless times the year that he moved to Barcelona. But I think one of the issues with the Barcelona move, firstly, is that he was coming in to replace Neymar, who had been just unbelievable for Barcelona. A completely different player, I think, to the PSG one. Yes, he had his ego at Barcelona too, but not as much as he has at PSG right now. And he was like that season where Suarez, Neymar, and Messi scored over 100 goals between them. I mean, that was like peak Barcelona, really sensational football at the time. So he came with a lot of pressure on his shoulders at Barcelona. And we all know the pressure at Barcelona and at Real Madrid is different to anything that you experience in the Premier League. So I can understand why it didn't potentially work out for him at the time, but it's going to be interesting to see what he does at Villa, though, because from my eyes, he doesn't fit in at Villa. He doesn't fit in as the starting number 10. They've got loads of quick wingers. They play fast attacking football, high pressing football, and I just don't think this style necessarily suits Felipe Coutinho unless he's going to be playing a different role.
Well, I think the role is kind of the second most important thing. I think for Coutinho, it's about nourishment. And I think, again, the Gerrard putting his arm around him, because if you look at his career to date, Coutinho, he flourishes when he's given all the confidence in the world, because when he was at Inter, he was a promising talent, but he certainly wasn't integral to their team. So when Brendan Rodgers brought him in at Liverpool, it was kind of seen as a bit of a punt. This guy has a lot of talent. Let's see if he cuts it. And there was probably a lot of people at the time thinking like, oh, another talented player was going to come into the Premier League and struggle with the physicality of it. And it took him a while to adapt to England. And then all of a sudden, he was the best player in the league for a short period, albeit a short period of time, but a significant period of time that he was outstanding. So I guess it's trying to introduce an environment where Coutinho feels free to flourish, and also free enough to lose the ball and not have your head drop. I think that's probably the most important thing at the moment. Then you can fit him into a system where he's actually going to flourish as much as possible in the team. So that, for me, is the most important thing. I don't think, like, if you're Aston Villa and you have the opportunity to sign Coutinho, I don't think you turn it down because he may possibly not fit into the system at the moment. You at least give it half a season, which is what they're going to do, at least.
Yeah, I think a loan to buy option with the fee being 30-odd million for Felipe Coutinho is a pretty low risk move for Steven Gerrard, because if it works out, you've got a world-class player there, but if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world.
No, yeah. Gerrard will say, look, I took a chance, it didn't work out, and then all eyes will be on Coutinho more than Villa It'll be like, what's wrong with Philip Coutinho,
exactly.
not what's wrong with Aston Villa. So yeah, like it's smart business by Villa for a number of reasons. If they can just instill a bit of confidence into him, then he can do really well. My worry for him is it will take him a few months to get back into it, and then by that time the season's over. So then Villa are really going to decide, okay, has he returned enough on our investment that we're actually going to make this permanent, or are there better players in the market? So it's a testing time for Coutinho.
Yeah, for sure. Another player that has moved to Villa Park is Lucas Digne, another former Barcelona player, as well as an Everton player. It's just this. I don't want to spend too much time on him, but it just seems so bizarre and a sign of intent from Everton that they would let one of their best players go because they are fully backing this manager who has really failed to capture any sort of imagination at the club so far.
Yeah, it is. It's an odd one. There must have been significant behind the scenes issues if you're leaving a player of the caliber of Digne go, and there's no obvious upgrade in his position either. So it is strange, and it's I think like talking now, we'll be looking back at this period of time at Everton and the Rafa Benitez era as like that was kind of really was the start of the end. Like there were a lot of poor results, but when he made that decision, we're not really sure what he was doing. Was it a power play? And look what happened to him. I think that's what we'll be saying in the future. And it looks to be the case now. Like it just, you were talking about like Chris Wood with Newcastle, Burnley, and similar clubs in similar positions and rivals. For me, Everton and Aston Villa are similarly placed in terms of rivalry in the Premier League. And for me, Benitez has just strengthened one of his rivals, pure and simple. And I don't unless now he has a really good replacement in mind that we don't know about yet. But from what I saw of Digne when I was watching Everton games, I was always impressed by him. I was always impressed by his technique going forward and his confidence and energy in attack. And I often thought he outperformed our own Seamus Coleman on the opposite flank, and that he was one of Everton's main threats. So look, unless Digne made it implausible for him to continue at Everton and he demanded to leave, and Benitez had no choice in the matter, which could well happen. Could well have happened. It's a strange move from Everton. If I was a Villa fan right now, I'd be delighted. No, they haven't kicked the football since Digne and Coutinho signed. So let's see what happens. But right now, you're far happier as a Villa fan than Everton. With Everton, it's a real strange time for them. And Benitez has this kind of obsession with adding winger after winger to the club, and he's linked with more wide players. So he's really trying to build a certain type of team, like a real throwback kind of mid-noughties team where the emphasis is with. And fair play to him if it works out. Because I actually thought his business for Andros Townsend and Damari Gray was good, considering it was 1.7 million in total for the two of them. One of them was free. And I thought for the first couple of months of the season, it looked to be working out. But like with Manchester United and a number of other clubs in the Premier League, like Arsenal too, there seems to be a deep-rooted cultural issue at Everton. And I don't know if it's all to do with Benitez, but I don't think he's helping.
There's nothing Everton managers love more. And I don't mean just Rafa Benitez. I mean the last couple of Everton managers. Nothing they love more than an inconsistent winger who's lightning for about 5 weeks and then does nothing for the rest of the season. And it just seems to be a really weird situation in terms of the power struggle at Everton right now, because firstly, when it was between Benitez and the sporting director, Benitez came out on top. Now it's between Benitez and Digne. Benitez came out on top. So they're really giving all the reins to him. So they'd really hope that this actually works out for Benitez, because if it doesn't, then the club's going to be a mess by the end of it.
Do you know, ever since Everton beat Arsenal 1-0 Monday Night Football, and Seamus Coleman post-match had Damari Gray next to him and said, this is what this kid can do. Like, if he just keeps it up, he has to be more consistent. And that was a kind of call to arms for Gray and a bit of a challenge to him. And ever since then, we haven't seen Gray. And that's kind of Everton in a nutshell. Well, like, is there any more frustrating club to follow than Everton? Because you're just in purgatory forever. Like, 7th place. I think the only club worse to support is Norwich, because it's like completely pointless supporting Norwich. Just go back up and go back down.
Unless you're in the Championship. I'd love to support Norwich in the Championship. But
yeah, but then you're by far the best team, so you should be going back up. So you kind of enjoy football every other season. But with Everton, it's the cruel potential of promise. And, we're really going to build a great team. And if you look at Everton squads throughout the last decade, like, it's improving on paper every season, but it's almost regressing on the pitch. It's I have sympathy for the odd few Everton supporting friends that I have, because when they get their hopes up, they're pulled back.
Yeah, I've a soft spot for Everton in general as a club, but as a football team, I despise them because they're incredibly inconsistent and always end up somehow in 8th place or around there. Let's move on to Manchester United. You mentioned them there. They were playing on Monday night against the aforementioned Aston Villa in the FA Cup. Somehow they came out on top. A 1-0 win for them. They scraped through into the 4th round. Aston Villa probably deserved to win that game by at least 2 goals in the end. 2 goals disallowed. United really, again, failing to capture any sort of imagination from the fans. But one player in particular has come under a lot of criticism since that game, and I think deservedly so, and that's Marcus Rashford. Mm-hmm. So context to all this is that Rashford at the weekend put up a statement on Twitter saying that, you shouldn't question his work rate. He always loved this club, and the usual football jargon nonsense that goes into these football statements. And he followed it up with a really abysmal performance. And I don't use that word lightly because I feel like you have to consider things that are going into a player's mindset going into a game. But there was one occasion where Greenwood in the first half had the ball, had a shot, and Marcus Rashford's just standing in the penalty box. He's not doing anything. He's not moving. He's not looking for the ball. He's not looking for the rebound. He's just standing there waiting for the ball to be turned over. And then in the second half, Greenwood again gets the ball, and this time he has a shot, and Martinez spills it. And instead, Marcus Rashford is about 3 to 4 yards away from this ball. And in previous years, you would have seen him chasing after that ball. Best case scenario, who gets on it, he scores. Worst case scenario, he might nick a touch on it. Martinez takes him down. It's a penalty to United. Instead, what Rashford does is he throws his arms up in the air, turns around and walks the other way. And that's just not something that you come to be accustomed with Marcus Rashford. So it really seems like there's something going on in his head there, and maybe he needs to be pulled out of it.
Did you ever watch Dream Team?
I did.
What's happening with Marcus Rashford at the moment reminds me of a storyline with a player who's just going through a terrible time, and it's over dramatized for the benefit of the viewer because it's fictional. And the highlights of one of the matches they show where it's clearly Chelsea, and they've just slightly edited it to be more purple, the jersey. And Greenwood takes the shot, and then the star striker Rashford doesn't follow up on it, and then they have a shot away to the crowd, and the crowd are going crazy. And then the next scene in the episode is back in the dressing room, and the manager's throwing boots at Rashford, and everyone's laying into him. He's just his head down, and then you're really worried for the player. Honestly, this is like turning into real life. So when he got subbed against Aston Villa on Monday night, and the camera's on him, and he just has that million-mile stare, and you're like concerned for the guy. And but in this case, it really is happening. And then he had that tweet on Saturday afternoon, and we reacted to it on Off the Ball, and Damien Delaney, as you said, and just immediately was like, what are you doing? And we all thought that. And he had the statement next to a picture of him training, and it's like Rashford's talking to his millions of fans, but really he's talking to himself out loud. And I imagine he sat there and thought, this is what I need to do because it's going to help me out of my funk. But he's just putting more pressure on himself then, because less than 2 days later, everyone's watching him play, and he has an abysmal performance. So now he probably can't tweet for a while because he knows he's going to get even more abuse. I really felt for him when he didn't actually go in for the rebound, because I think we've all been there in life at times where you just don't have any energy to try because it's all going wrong for you, and whatever walk of life you're doing, and it can happen. It can transfer to the pitch, and it's just like, I can't do this anymore kind of thing. And he might have that fatalistic attitude at the moment where I'm never going to be able to play football again. But like, you look at his stats, and he's such an impressive player. I mean, as recently as 2019-20, he scored 17 Premier League goals and 31 starts, and he's 57 Premier League goals overall with 31 assists. And there's a myriad of other stats too to describe Rashford and illustrate how brilliant he can be. So we know it's there, and I suppose that's a frustration for him, is that he knows it's there, and it's just about recapturing it. And at this stage, I've heard in the last couple of weeks murmurs of questioning whether should Rashford move on to another club, at least short term, just to try something else and get out of the United environment and maybe come back another time. And initially I dismissed that idea, and I thought, sure, leaving is not always the answer. And in the last few days, I thought, might not be the worst idea. Might not be, unless the manager coming in the summer to replace Ralph Rangnick really can, a bit like Coutinho with Gerrard, put his arm around him and say, Marcus, you're brilliant. Take the pressure off yourself, because the reports that we're hearing all week is that while his body language has been terrible and can often be poor throughout the years. It looks like he's not doing as much as he actually is statistically. But in training, he's doing, triple sessions, and there's people suggesting that he's actually forcing it and he's trying too hard. And he's trying to learn everything off Cristiano Ronaldo. But Ronaldo's a different beast altogether, the way he mentally prepares for games. Don't think you can compare yourself to him. And I don't know if he's trying to be like another Ronaldo and mentality-wise. But I guess for Rashford, he just needs to go back to his happy place. And he seems to have been really struggling ever since he not just missed the penalty in the shootout of the Euro 2020 final against Italy, but all throughout that tournament, he seemed to really struggle. And I don't know now is the answer just to take a few weeks out, or maybe play him in the less pressurized games just to see if he can knock a few goals under his belt and then he can get going again. But it's the lowest point in his United career right now. But it's worth putting time and investment into him because we know that he can do it. We know that he can return to brilliant form.
Another report is that he apparently went to Solskjaer and said that his role was unclear, and apparently Solskjaer told him to, suck it up. Which we can't confirm or deny whether that's true or not, but that's one of the stories that's coming out. The one thing that does frustrate me with the Rashford stuff is the people who bring the charity stuff into it and say that he should concentrate on football instead. Honestly, if I'm going to choose between Marcus Rashford being a good footballer for Manchester United or him feeding thousands of children in the UK, I think I'd rather feed thousands of children in the UK, if I'm being completely honest. But it's just one of the frustrating things that when you do these things in public, it leads to this sort of nonsense that you get on social media with people attacking him for that. But in general, United have just been really poor. And I think it's not... I don't know if it's down to Ralph Ragnick, to be honest. If I'm being completely honest, I've watched United several times now over the last couple of weeks, and they're one of the worst passing teams I've ever seen at this level. Like, the simple 5-yard passes breaks down the United attack and gives over possession of the ball. So it's not a quick fix at Old Trafford at all, if you're looking at what's actually happening on the pitch. In terms of other stuff that's going on, the FA Cup, the League Cup, all happened over the last couple of weeks. League Cup semi-finals this week, Chelsea through to the final. Thomas Tuchel has now taken Chelsea to a League Cup final, an FA Cup final, and a Champions League final, all in a short stint at the club so far. This is incredibly impressive stuff from what Tuchel has done for where he took Chelsea from to where they are now, Colm.
Do you remember when he took over from Frank Lampard and there was uproar over it? You need to give Lampard a chance. How's he supposed to prove that he's worthy of being Chelsea manager? And you have this PSG failure coming in, so what's he going to do? And it's just like, it's just the infuriating short-termism in football, like from fans and analysts and pundits. And not obviously that, like, there was a large cohort who thought it was a great appointment, but he's just tactically turned him around. Like, you look from even his very first game in charge was the 0-0 draw at home to Wolves, and they just looked a much better functioning unit. And I kind of like, even though Chelsea obviously a huge rival to United, I really like Tuchel, and I like what he does and how he goes about his business and how he deals with the media. Because I suppose, look, that's the only way we're ever going to really know him. And like, we have two ways of knowing managers: it's the team that they put out and how they shape the team, and then it's their interactions with the media. And I like both. So I have no reason to dislike Tuchel, and I love the way that he, unashamedly just explains what he was trying to do when Chelsea don't have a good result. It's like, look, this is what's happening. Wasn't happy with the result today. We had a system in place, didn't work out, and we're going to have to change it next time. And I just love that transparency and confidence in your own methods, because Chelsea have had very mixed results this season, and they flew out of the traps. But they're still some way behind Liverpool and Manchester City. And but you still completely trust in Tuchel's process. So it's worrying from United's perspective, because up until the midway point of last season, from United's perspective, it was Liverpool and Man City we had to worry about. But now it's Chelsea as well, because Tuchel has kind of ingrained a really deep-rooted, brilliant culture at the club, the total opposite to United, in that it's a systemic team that doesn't rely on any individual, so it's totally interchangeable. You can bring players in and out, and yes, there are negative results along the way, but the idea is is brilliant. And you look at that, everything he's done, every club he's been to, Mainz, Borussia Dortmund, and PSG, he's had success everywhere he's been. And like you say, to win the Champions League a few months after joining the club, I saw on the overlap with Gary Neville and Frank Lampard that Lampard was saying, people were texting me saying, that's your team after we beat Manchester City. And that meant a lot, Gary. That meant a lot. But it's like, no,
it's like Jake Humphreys congratulated Frank Lampard for it as well.
It's like it's Tuchel's implementation, Frank. I mean, we can all football manager bring in players, but it's Tuchel's implementation. And then, like the cup final defeat was poor against Leicester. That was really poor. They should have, they really should have won that. But again, it wasn't like you were saying afterwards, oh, Tuchel's in trouble here. Or no, that's a real underperformance, because he explains every method along the way. So you're like, yeah, okay, well, that makes sense. And that's so refreshing, I think, because managers are naturally enough fairly defensive when things don't go well. Yeah. Not Tuchel.
It was a stunning goal that won that FA Cup.
Yeah, you're
well, so not much you can do there. I think we're just lucky that we have probably the 4 out of the top 5 managers in the world managing the Premier League right now to follow along with. But speaking of some other news that's going on, Chiedozie Ogbene was speaking to our own Ashley O'Reilly earlier on this week for Off the Ball. He's obviously doing his bits with Rotherham in League One, and his contract situation is still sort of up in the air, but he seems to be confident enough that if he doesn't get a new contract, that he will get a move elsewhere. Ogbene, from your neck of the woods, Colm, a lot of praise for him during his early stints at Ireland, and he's one of the most exciting players that we've had, because it just gives us something that we haven't had for a long time in terms of that winger who's not afraid to take risks. Yeah, brilliant. And he's a symbol of the players coming through across Ireland as well, and the team that we could very soon have at across the board at national senior level. And like you say, the great thing about Ogbene is that he loves the ball, if you know what I mean. Whereas maybe Irish teams when we were growing up are, backs against the wall and all about grinding out results, which is, great in itself. But I think, Ireland are long overdue modernising into how football is played now, and Ogbene is kind of a symbol of that. But yeah, in preparation for our chat today about Ogbene, I was talking to one of his former coaches, Declan Coleman. He's Cork City first team coach, and he trained Ogbene before he got the move over. And I was just asking Declan about him, what's he like? Did you ever see that? Did you always see that potential in him? And he was just saying that the big thing about Ogbene was that he was raw. He could be very threatening going forward, but his decision-making kind of was the thing that they needed to work on in his end product. But he said more than anything is he had a world-class attitude, and he was willing to take on constructive criticism all the time. And they would carpool on the way to matches and training, and the whole time Ogbene was asking for more and more information about how he can improve, and comparing his game to professionals' games, and watching clips of other players, and just seeing where he can improve. And it was just a really interesting insight from Declan, from his coaching of him, because he was playing youth football with Everton in Cork, the club in Cork. So that's where Dec started coaching him, and then he was with him with Chamor and College Corinthians, Killareen, all these Cork clubs. So Cork City signed him for the under-19s team from those clubs, and he just evolved with each passing month, because his biggest thing, as I said, was he was just taking on information the whole time. And I was asking Dec, look, ultimately, did you see this coming? Did you see that he would be a success, that you were dealing with the future Irish senior international? And Dec said, look, I've coached a lot of very talented players, so you always think that certain players can do it, but you're never sure. You can never be sure about any player, regardless of how talented they are, because it's all about their attitude and their adaptability and their ability to come back from poor spells. And he said in that context, he never doubted Ogbene. So he said he's delighted to see him where he is now. And he said it's all with the caveat that he still has loads of room for improvement. But he said in terms of attitude, you wouldn't deal with a better player. Just really, really mature, and knew how he needed to improve. And we're kind of seeing the fruits of that labour now. Yeah, and I think one of the great things about him is actually that he is playing in League One, because he's sort of this unknown figure within the Irish setup. So if you take the Luxembourg or the Portugal games, for example, they didn't really know what to do with him, because it seemed like they didn't do much background on him, didn't really know. He was this unknown quantity, and every time he got the ball, he absolutely terrified their defense, because he would just get it and run at them. And because he's a physical guy for his age, he was really difficult to put off the ball as well. So it's exciting to see that type of player playing for Ireland again, who's just not afraid to take risks. But also he has a lot of confidence. It seems he's telling our own Aisling O'Reilly that he thinks Ireland can top the group in the Nations League this year when he was looking ahead to what's happening. It's not going to be for another couple of months, but he thinks that this team is capable of topping the group, which again is not something that you're used to hearing from Irish players.
Not at all. And again, it's great. It's just part of the cultural reboot that I was talking about earlier, is that we, as Irish football fans, we used to maybe have to look abroad for how we like to see football played and admire other players from other countries and their attitude towards football. But now we're finally seeing it with our own. And it's going to be a work in progress. There's going to be a lot of backward steps along the way as we're going forward. But like Ogbene is both saying all the right things and doing the right things on the pitch. And it's like everything that we're seeing in terms of like Ogbene's interview with our own Aisling and what we're seeing on the pitch in his few displays so far for Ireland is all backed up by what Declan was telling me about what he was like coaching him throughout his teenage years. And Declan said, look, there's plenty more of Ogbene out there. So it's about getting those players through. And look, thankfully, look, we've had this discussion before, what I'm about to say, but you know, it's great that Ireland is far more culturally diverse in the last 20 years than any time prior. So we're getting a lot of options out there from football players coming through. So it's brilliant. And like, it's genuinely exciting to see what type of Ireland team is going to take to the pitch in the coming decades, because like it's a long overdue modernization of our methods. And I think we're going to see the fruits of that labor very soon.
Yeah, big time. That interview is coming up after the break. So Colm, thanks very much for this evening.
Nice one, Enda.
All right, so coming up after the break, I'll bring you that chat between Aisling and Ireland's own Chiedozie Ogbene.